You walk into a house, and maybe it's a beautifully restored mid-century place or, a brand new build. Usually you're looking right at the surface.
Right. You notice the quartz countertops, the hardwood floors, the fresh paint.
Exactly. It's the aesthetic layers.
Yeah.
It's all very visible and, well, very easy to understand.
Well,
But then you open that little gray metal door in the garage or the basement.
the electrical panel.
Yeah, the electrical panel. And suddenly that beautiful, easy-to-understand house completely vanishes. You're just staring at rows of black switches, warning labels, and like a bunch of random numbers.
Okay, let's unpack this because looking at a home's electrical panel is essentially like popping the hood of a modern car.
It looks incredibly intimidating.
It really does. But once you understand the basic physics underneath, it all actually makes perfect sense.
And that hidden reality is exactly what we're digging into today. We are pulling from this massive, highly detailed collection of electrical guides from Burleson AT Electric. They were authored by John Constantine.
A really fascinating read, honestly. Oh, absolutely. And while this data is incredibly specific to Burleson, Texas, which, is an area that deals with severe storms, intense summer heat, and surprisingly brutal winter freezes, the underlying physics of capacity and safety we're going to discuss applies to you no matter where you live.
Or where you plug into a wall. So if you are planning a massive kitchen renovation, thinking about buying an electric vehicle, or if you're just someone with an insanely curious mind, that is our mission for this deep dive.
We are going to explore why the homes we live in are secretly struggling to keep up with our tech.
And we're going to decode the hidden language of your house's wiring. So where do we start?
Well, to understand that struggle, you really have to start at the absolute heart of the home's infrastructure, that service panel you just mentioned.
Right.
The age of your house tells a huge part of the story before you even open that metal door. If your home was built before 1980, its electrical system almost certainly needs major work.
And if it was built between 1980 and 2000?
Then you might be walking a very fine line.
Because we're talking about the overall capacity size of these panels, right?
Yeah.
Like in older homes, you typically see 60 amp to 100 amp service.
Yes, and today, a 100 amp panel is basically an antique.
Wow, an antique.
Pretty much. I mean, 150 amps is considered borderline. 200 amps is the modern baseline just to handle a standard lifestyle, and 400 amps is reserved for, massive homes pulling incredible power.
That makes sense.
Think about the actual math of modern living. A central AC unit pulls roughly 20 to 30 amps. An electric range takes 40 to 50 amps. A hot tub demands 40 to 60 amps.
So you start running those simultaneously on a 100 amp panel and you hit a wall immediately.
Exactly.
It's like an airport air traffic controller trying to land 50 modern jumbo jets on a dirt runway built for 1940s biplanes.
Yeah.
The infrastructure just isn't wide enough for the traffic.
That runway analogy is perfect because of the continuous traffic aspect. You can't just max out your panel at exactly 100 amps and call it a day.
Right, because of the 80% rule.
Yes, the industry standard safety protocol. If your panel is rated for 100 amps, your continuous electrical demand needs to stay under 80 amps to prevent the system from overheating.
I mean, I get the math,
Yeah.
but honestly, let me push back on this a bit.
Sure, go ahead.
My house has a panel from the late 90s. I have an electric oven, I run a big air conditioner, I have 2 TVs going, and, my house hasn't burned down.
Right.
Are we just fear-mongering to sell expensive panel upgrades?
Yep.
Like, if the lights turn on when I flip the switch, why do I need to fix what isn't broken?
Because the infrastructure degrades silently under heat. When you push a wire to its maximum capacity, it physically heats up.
Okay.
That heat expands the copper, and over years of expanding and contracting, it actually weakens connections behind your drywall. You might not see a fire today, but you will start seeing glaring red flags.
What kind of red flags?
Your lights will noticeably dim when a major appliance like the vacuum kicks on. You'll experience frequent breaker trips, or you'll see older two-prong outlets that lack a ground wire. These are structural warnings.
Wow. So how do you know if you're actually safe?
The only way to know if you're truly safe is to have a licensed electrician perform a formal load calculation.
A load calculation. What does that actually entail? Is it just like walking around and counting the outlets?
Oh, not at all. A load calculation is a definitive mathematical model. An electrician factors in your home's square footage, the specific wattage of your fixed appliances, your safety margins, and your future power needs.
Ah, so they run the physics to tell you exactly where your capacity stands.
Precisely. Skipping that calculation before you start adding new gadgets is just a recipe for disaster.
So a load calculation proves exactly how much runway you have left, which totally explains why attempting to update just a single room, like a kitchen, creates this massive domino effect throughout the entire
Oh,
house.
definitely. The modern kitchen is an absolute stress test for residential wiring.
Yeah, the source material had some crazy stats on this.
It did. If you look at a kitchen built before 1990, it typically had maybe 2, sometimes 3 electrical circuits for the entire room. Today, modern building codes require a minimum of 7 to 10 dedicated circuits just for the kitchen.
7 to 10 circuits for one room seems excessive. Why the huge jump?
Well, think about the appliances we consider standard now. You need entirely dedicated circuits for the refrigerator, the microwave, the dishwasher, and the garbage disposal.
Right, all the heavy hitters.
Plus, on top of that, code now mandates an outlet every 4 feet along your countertops.
Wow, every 4 feet?
Yeah. That level of power distribution prevents overloading. It means you can run your high wattage blender and your toaster oven at the exact same time without popping a breaker and sitting in the dark.
Which is nice, but that power distribution is also why a kitchen remodel comes with serious sticker shock. A full kitchen rewiring runs between $1,500 and $4,000.
Yeah.
And because of all those new circuits, it almost always triggers the need for a full panel upgrade. But the heavy appliances aren't even the sneakiest part of the upgrade.
Not at all.
The shift towards smart homes introduces a completely different headache called the neutral wire problem.
This is a major hurdle for anyone trying to modernize an older home. In pre-2000 homes, the wiring in the wall behind a standard light switch usually only consists of 2 things: a hot wire bringing power in and a switch leg.
Let's define that for a second. A switch leg is the wire that only carries power up to the light bulb after you physically flip the switch up.
Exactly.
So when the switch is in the down position, the wire is dead. The box itself has no continuous power.
So what does this all mean? Wait, isn't a smart switch just, well, a switch?
You would think so.
Why does it need a continuous power cycle, and why is adding a simple neutral wire so insanely expensive? What's fascinating here is that a smart switch isn't a switch in the traditional mechanical sense. It is essentially a tiny, always-on computer buried inside your wall.
A tiny computer.
Right. It is constantly awake, listening for a Wi-Fi command from your phone or your voice assistant. To stay awake, it requires a constant trickle of electricity, which a switch leg cannot provide. It needs a neutral wire to complete that continuous circuit.
Ah, okay, so it's never truly off. But why the massive price tag to just add one wire?
It's entirely about the labor. Retrofitting a neutral wire means an electrician has to fish a new line blindly through closed, finished walls.
Oh, that sounds awful.
It takes hours and costs about $100 to $250 per individual switch.
Wow. Per switch.
Yeah, that is why the strongest recommendation in the source text is to only upgrade to smart switches when you are already doing a major renovation and the drywall is torn open. With the wall studs exposed, the cost drops down to just $50 to $100 per switch.
Open walls change the entire financial equation. But even a fully upgraded, smart-wired kitchen looks like a drop in the bucket compared to the biggest continuous power draw hitting residential homes right now.
You're talking about electric vehicles.
Oh yeah, if a modern kitchen pushes a panel to the edge, an electric vehicle pushes it right over the cliff.
EVs are completely rewriting the rules of residential power demand. They are the ultimate test of a home's capacity.
Let's break down the math on charging. Level 1 charging is simply plugging your car into a standard 120-volt wall outlet. But that only drips like 3 to 5 miles of range into the battery per hour.
Which is practically useless for a normal commute.
Right. You need level 2 charging, which is a 240-volt dedicated circuit that adds 25 to 40 miles of range per hour.
And that level 2 charger requires 40 to 60 amps of continuous power.
Going back to our earlier capacity limits, if I have an older 100-amp panel, my air conditioner is pulling 30 amps, my electric range is pulling 40 amps, and I plug in a 50-amp car charger.
The math is fundamentally broken.
Right. I'm demanding 120 amps from a system that can only deliver 80 safely.
Mathematically, it is impossible to run safely. The main breaker will trip, shutting down the entire house.
So you have to upgrade.
To support an EV, you must upgrade your infrastructure. Installing a standard NEMA 1450 outlet for a portable charger runs $500 to $1,000.
Okay.
Hardwiring a permanent wall unit is $800 to $1,500. And if you have to upgrade the panel to get that required capacity, you're adding another $1,800 to $3,500.
That adds up fast.
And furthermore, the distance from your panel to your garage directly dictates the cost. The thick copper wire needed to safely carry 60 amps is wildly expensive per foot.
It's an interesting paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
We are collectively rushing to adopt green technology electric vehicles, high-efficiency heat pumps, but making our homes green actually requires a massive, heavy-duty industrialization of our residential wiring.
It's a necessary industrialization, though, and this ties perfectly into the concept of future-proofing.
How so?
Even if you only own an EV that maxes out at a 40-amp charge right now, it makes long-term financial sense to pay your electrician to run a 60-amp wire.
Or because cars will inevitably have bigger batteries later.
Exactly. In 5 years, charging limits will be faster. You don't want to pay someone to rip out a perfectly good wire you just installed. Building that heavy-duty infrastructure up front adds serious resale value to your home.
That makes total sense. And it's not just cars draining the panel. We have to consider extreme weather features.
Very true.
In Burleson, for example, the guides mention that hot tubs and heated bathroom floors are incredibly popular to fight off those surprisingly brutal winter mornings. A hot tub alone demands an entirely separate 240-volt circuit and its own subpanel.
And when you start stacking these continuous loads, an EV charging while a hot tub heater kicks on in the middle of a freezing night, you strain an older panel past its breaking point.
Which is really dangerous.
It is. That strain is exactly where a mild inconvenience turns into a genuine life-threatening emergency.
Let's dig into those emergencies, because pushing a system too far doesn't always just result in a harmless click and the lights going out.
Unfortunately, no. When physics meets aging infrastructure, heat becomes your biggest enemy. Visible sparks, loud sizzling or crackling sounds inside your walls, or an electrical panel that physically feels hot to the touch. Those are not things you put on a to-do list for next month. Those are signs of active failure.
There was one specific warning sign in the text that completely stopped me in my tracks. A fishy, acrid, or chemical smell in your house. Here's where it gets really interesting. At first, you might assume you have a plumbing trap issue or some weird food trap.
Yeah, that's a common mistake.
But you're actually smelling an electrical fire.
Exactly. The insulation wrapped around your wires is made of plastic and specialized chemical compounds. When those wires overload and get dangerously hot, that plastic literally starts to melt and off gas.
And that smells like fish.
That chemical release smells remarkably like fish or urine. It means there's an active, smoldering electrical fire inside your wall where you can't see it.
Think about the psychology of that. How easily someone might just light a scented candle to cover up a weird, fishy smell, instead of evacuating, calling 911, and getting an emergency electrician out there immediately.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it highlights a profound psychological blind spot we have with our homes.
Because it's invisible to us.
Right. Electricity is the absolute lifeblood of the house. But precisely because it's hidden behind drywall, we ignore it. We assume it's fine until it's critically failing.
And speaking of critical failures, the text explicitly points out that if your home was built in the 70s or 80s and you have a Federal, Pacific, or Zinsco brand panel, those are known fire hazards. They are ticking time bombs that must be replaced immediately.
They really are. The fundamental job of a circuit breaker is to trip to shut off power when a wire gets too hot.
Right.
Federal, Pacific, and Zinsco panels have notoriously high failure rates where the breakers simply refuse to trip. The wire keeps pulling power, keeps getting hotter, and eventually starts a fire.
Man, this all sounds pretty dire. But there's an amazing counterexample in the sources of using physics to actually protect your infrastructure. The winter ceiling fan anomaly.
Oh, I love this tip. Most of us only turn on a ceiling fan in August to cool down. But running a ceiling fan on low in the dead of winter is a brilliant protective measure for your electrical grid.
It sounds completely counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
Like, why turn on a fan when you're freezing?
Because heat naturally rises. Your central heater works incredibly hard to pump warm air into a room, but all that heat immediately pools flat against the ceiling, completely useless to you sitting on the couch.
Yep.
Meanwhile, your thermostat, which is mounted at eye level, still registers the room as cooled.
Right. So the heater kicks on, pumps more hot air up to the ceiling, shuts off, and then immediately realizes the lower half of the room is still cold and turns right back on. It just cycles endlessly.
That's called short cycling. It creates massive mechanical wear and tear on the blower motor and pulls a huge surge of electricity every single time it starts up.
But the fan fixes that.
By running the ceiling fan on low in reverse, you gently push that trapped heat down into the living space. The thermostat reads the correct temperature, and your HVAC system isn't constantly surging power.
You are literally protecting your home's electrical capacity just by flipping a fan switch.
Hmm.
That is so cool. Okay, let's bring this all down to earth.
Sure.
You know your panel is old. You want the smart switches, you need the EV charger for the new car, and you want to ensure your kitchen won't burn the house down. How do you survive the reality of a renovation without destroying your finances?
It all comes down to establishing a realistic baseline for your budget. A good rule of thumb is that electrical work should account for 8 to 12% of a kitchen remodel.
Okay, so if you're spending $30,000 on a kitchen,
You should ring fence about 2,400 to 3,600 just for the electrical. Bathrooms are slightly less intensive, around 5 to 8% of the total budget.
but the hidden costs are where people get really hurt, right? You have to account for temporary power during construction, which can run you $200 to $500 just to keep the contractor's tools running.
Don't forget the drywall repair.
Oh, right. Drywall repair after the electrician cuts holes everywhere, or trenching your yard for an outdoor hot tub line. You have to keep a 15 to 20% contingency fund specifically for electrical surprises.
And to avoid tapping into that contingency fund, you have to understand the 3 phases of the renovation process.
Let's hear them.
Phase 1 is the planning and load calculation. Phase 2 is the rough-in. That's when the walls are open down to the bare studs and the wires are being strung. And phase 3 is the finish work, which is testing the system and putting the plates on the switches after the drywall is painted.
And right in the middle of that, during phase 2, is the most practical, money-saving advice from the text. Walk the space during the rough-in.
It's brilliant advice because it helps you avoid the dreaded change order.
Right, a change order is when you alter the plan mid-project. Let's say I want to move a light switch 2 feet to the left. If I do that during the rough-in, when the walls are open,
It's trivial. The electrician pulls a few staples, moves the wire, and nails the box to a different stud. It might cost you an hour of labor.
nice and easy.
But if you change your mind and want that exact same switch moved during phase 3 after the drywall is up, taped, and painted,
It costs 3 to 4 times as much.
because you aren't just paying an electrician anymore. You are paying the electrician to cut a new hole and reroute the wire. Then you're paying a drywall crew to come back and patch the old hole. And then you're paying a painter to seamlessly blend the new texture and paint.
It's a cascade of expensive delays.
Exactly. Seamless coordination between your general contractor and your electrician is the only way to avoid those massive bills.
We have covered a staggering amount of ground today. We started by looking past the aesthetic layer of our homes into the mathematical reality of the 80% rule, seeing how older 100-amp panels are like dirt runways trying to handle jumbo jets.
Yeah, that runway analogy really puts it into perspective.
We unpacked the hidden complexities of modern kitchens, the sneaky continuous power draw of smart switches, and the massive capacity requirements of level 2 EV chargers pushing our grids to the edge.
A lot of hidden dangers.
Absolutely. And finally, we learned how to spot terrifying warnings like that fishy smell of melting plastic and how to logically phase a renovation so you don't go broke.
It really changes how you view the walls around you, doesn't it? And this raises an important question to mull over as we finish.
What's that?
Well, if we look back at those pre-1980s homes with 60-amp panels, they are functionally obsolete today. And right now, a 200-amp panel is our modern standard, which is just enough to confidently handle a smart kitchen and a single electric vehicle. But what happens in 20 years?
Oh, wow. When a standard household has 2 electric vehicles, fully electric heating, and even more always-on computing power integrated into the structure of the house.
Exactly. Will today's brand new, top-of-the-line 200-amp future-proof panel eventually look like a quaint antique that needs to be ripped out? It makes you wonder what the ultimate physical limit of a residential home's wiring really is before we have to rethink how we distribute power entirely.
That is a wild thought. We might be having this exact same conversation in 20 years about upgrading to a 600-amp residential panel, just to keep the lights on. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden currents powering our everyday lives. Take a moment this week to go check your own breaker box, safely, of course. Try to look past the surface layer of your home, pop the hood, and see what's really running the engine.